Shalom, and welcome to another lesson in the series, The People of Israel, Striving for Leadership. Today we are studying the book of Judges, chapter 9. We studied the chapters 6, 7, and 8, dealing with the leadership of Gideon, a person with initiative, a person who starts from very low, manages to climb up and to arrange the people of Israel, to unite them, to go out to battle against the Midianites. And actually, the feeling is that the leadership of Gideon is really of the highest level of leadership throughout the entire era of the judges. But the time of Gideon comes to an end, and in a way, a disappointing end. The disappointing end is a major understanding in the entire book of Judges, the understanding of what leadership is expected for, what the people of Israel are really expecting, and why Gideon was not the king they were waiting for. And today I'm going to start reading, not from the chapter 9, but actually from the last verses in the chapter 8. And we're going to continue on to chapter 9, and we'll see an aspect, a perspective of what kingdom is all about. Because Gideon really was a very unique leader. And he was just as one step away from being that king which the era of Judges is trying to lead us to. The era of Judges is the intermediate period of time towards reaching the ideal leadership of kingdom. I'm going to read chapter 8 from verse 22. ויאמרו איש ישראל אל גדעון, משול בנו גם אתה, גם בנך, גם בן בנך, כי הושעתנו מיד מדיין. And the people of Israel approach Gideon, and they request from him that he should lead them. Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson. You, your son and your grandson, definitely means be our king. The difference between a temporary leader and a king is the continuity from generation to generation. And they say, please rule us, you, your son, and your grandchild. For you have saved us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon replied, I shall not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord should rule over you. God is your ruler. That's what Gideon says. It sounds really impressive. But then, immediately in verse 24, we find a very surprising story. ויאמר להם גדעון, שאלה מכם שאלה, תנו לי איש נזם שלו, כי נזמי זהב להם כי ישמעאל הם. Gideon said, I make a request, let each of every one of you give me a nose ring from his booty. For since they were the brothers of the Ishmaelites, they had gold nose rings. The people of Israel managed to overcome the Midianites. The Midianites, related to the Ishmaelites, had many nose rings. He said, let's collect all the nose rings. And what is he doing with them? They replied, we shall indeed. ויאמרו נתון תיתן, ויפרסו את השמלה וישליכו שם איש נזם משלו. They spread out a garment, and each man threw into it a nose ring from his booty. The weight of the nose rings he requested was 1,700 gold dinars, besides the crescent, the pendants, and the purple wool garment worn by the kings of Midian. And besides the chains of the necks of the camels. They collected all of these jewelry. And what does Gideon do with it? Vayaz Gideon le'ephod. And Gideon made it into an ephod to commemorate the deliverance and to hang it up in the city, in Ophrah. But eventually Israel went astray after it there, and it became a pitfall for Gideon and his household. It seems that the people of Israel, in the days of Gideon, right after Gideon announces, I'm not ruling over you, God is ruling over you, they go ahead and they worship the gold rings. Is it idol worshipping? Surprisingly, it seems like it's not really idol worshipping, because if we read in verse 33, so it was that when Gideon died, the children of Israel once again went astray after the Baalim, and they assigned Baal, buried, and a god for themselves. It seems that only after Gideon dies do the people of Israel do go to idol worshipping. So it was not in the days of Gideon. So what is this ephod that Gideon's building, and what is the story we see here? In order to understand this, I want to make a comparison between Gideon and two other characters in the history of the Torah. One, Gideon very much reminds us throughout his whole leadership. Moses. God comes to Moses and says, I want you to be a leader. And he says no. The same thing happens with Gideon. And Gideon asks for different signs to Otot. And so as Moses did. And we see several things. And Gideon leads the war against Midian. But I want to compare Gideon to one more person. And that is Jacob. Jacob and Gideon have a lot in common. Gideon has 70 descendants, as we see in verse 30. So does Jacob in the book of Genesis, the beginning of the book of Exodus, description of 70 descendants. Jacob stops in two cities, Penuel, and he stops in the Sukkot. And these are two cities that Gideon managed to overcome. Gideon calls his son Yeter, where we see Jacob refers to his oldest son, Yeter Se'et Yeter Az, in the end of the book of Genesis. So we see a lot of things in common between Jacob and Gideon. But what's very interesting is that Jacob also collects the booty of the rings that his children manage to collect when they fight against Shechem. But there we see a different story. In chapter 35, in the book of Genesis, in verse 4, Vayitnu el Yaakov et kol elehu hanichar shebiyadam et hanizamim asher boznehem, vayitmon otam Yaakov tachat ha'ila asher im Shechem. Vayiven sham mizbeach. Jacob also collects all the booty. He collects the rings. They gave Jacob all the heathen gods that they owned and their earrings that were in their ears, and Yaakov hid them beneath the oak that was near Shechem. Jacob hides all of this booty under the tree, and then he builds an altar for God. Gideon, after he manages to overcome Midian, he doesn't want to make idol worshiping, but he wants to commemorate. He wants to show off how great he did in his victory. And here is the mistake of Gideon, where Gideon thinks it's his victory. And there he falls. Because once again, the people, instead of remembering that God was the one who led them in this battle against the Midianites, they feel and they fill themselves with their strong ego, understanding that it was their victory. And this is where the fall of the kingdom, or the potential kingdom of Gideon. And from here I want to continue on to chapter 9, where we see what happens in the next generation. Gideon calls his son Avimelech. Avimelech means two things in Hebrew. Avimelech, my father is a king, or I am the father of kings. Avimelech. And Avimelech takes to himself the feeling that he is the king, and he goes ahead and kills 70 of his brothers. And then we have the famous parable of the trees, where there's one son of Gideon who remains, and he goes on to the top of the mountain of Gerizim, which is supposed to be the mountain of blessing. And he warns the people, and he says to them, the trees went to anoint a king over themselves. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. The olive tree said, why shall I cause my fatness to cease, so that God and man should honor themselves through me? He then goes to the fig. The fig says, why? I have what to do. I want to produce the honey that I produce, the sweetness. The trees then go to the grapevine. You go and reign over us. But the grapevine said to them, no. Shall I give up my vintage that gladdens God and people and man, to go sway over the trees. Then the trees went to the thorn and said, you go and reign over us. And the thorn replied, if you honestly anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, then may a flame come out of the thorn and burn all the cedars of Lebanon. The trees want a king. And they're looking for the king. And they refer to the three fruit trees, the fig and the grape. And they refer to the olive tree. And they refer to the three of them. They say, please, king, rule over us. And a king's job is to not to look at his own personal needs, but the needs of the people. But they say, no, we're busy with our wine, we're busy with our honey. And who rules over them? The thorn. And what does the thorn say? Come and sit in my shade. What kind of shade does the thorn have? The thorn doesn't have any shade. But then we hear of a new tree. He says, come and sit in my shade, and if not, fire will come out of the thorn and will burn the cedars of Lebanon. The cedars of Lebanon. The cedars of Lebanon. Let's look for a second in the book of Ezekiel. What Ezekiel says about the cedars of Lebanon. The cedars of Lebanon are known for their shade. I'm reading in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 17. And he says, Behar Marom Yisrael, in verse 23, Eshtalenu, Venasa Anaf Asapri, Veyal Eretz Adir Veshachnu Tachtav Kol Tzipor Kol Kanaf, Betzel Daliotav Tishkona. I will plant on the mountain the height of Israel, and it will bear branches and produce fruit and become a magnificent cedar. And all the birds of every kind of wing will dwell under it. They will dwell in the shade of its branches. The cedar has branches. Not the thorn. The cedar has branches. Same again in Ezekiel chapter 31. We see once again the reference to the cedar, the one that has shade. Verse 12, chapter 31, Ezekiel. Strangers of fierce nations cut it down and abandoned it. Broken all its gutters, and all nations of earth departed from its shade and forsook it. Every bird, heaven rested upon its ruins, every beast in the field upon its branches. And its branches lay. All the nations of earth departed from its shade and forsook it. The cedar tree is the tree of shade. A thorn tree has no shade. It's not even a tree. It can burn the people. And he says to the people of Shechem, you could have taken a cedar tree, meaning you could have taken somebody from the family of Gideon, and you preferred Avimelech. Avimelech, if we recall, in the end of chapter 8, is not of the regular family of Gideon. He is the son of his concubine. Gideon has the potential of being a king. But God warned the king of Israel 3 things. Don't take too many horses, don't marry too many wives, and don't collect too much money. Gideon falls, at least in 2 of them. He takes many wives, as it says in verse 30 in chapter 8. Gideon had 70 sons who issued from his loins, for he had many wives. He collected much money. And the horses, I think, refers to not only just collecting horses and having a big barn, but also establishing a big army with wagons, showing off. And Gideon falls in these 3 things. And his son Avimelech, from the son of the concubine, kills all of his sons, understanding that kingdom, if I'm a king, I can do whatever I want. The kingdom is for me. And here was the great fall of Gideon. And the son of Gideon, Yotam, goes on to that mountain of Gerizim, which should have been a mountain of blessing. And he says to the people of Shechem, just like Avimelech, that son of the concubine, that thorn, just like he killed all my brothers, he's going to do it to you too. And that's what he warns them. In verse 16, if you really, honestly and sincerely crowned Avimelech, and if you have done good on the Yerubal, his household, if you reward him in accordance with the kindness of his hands. But you understand that that's not what you did. You were forced to go after the thorn. And what's going to happen? The same thing's going to happen to you. Teitzei, verse 20. Teitzei esh me'Avimelech v'tochal et balei Shechem et beit Milo. V'teitzei esh me'balei Shechem v'tochal Avimelech. The family of Avimelech is going to burn you, and you're going to burn. There's going to be a disappointment. Because with Avimelech, who had the potential of being a king, saw the whole thing in these eyes of his own personal perspective. And just like when his brothers didn't serve his interest, he burnt them. When the people of Shechem are not going to serve his interest, he's going to burn them too. And that's what we see what happens later on. He is a man of leadership through interest. And this is where Gideon and his family fall. This was the obstacle from their becoming the potential king. Gideon, who started off destroying the idol worshipping and gathering the people and uniting them after understanding the need of the people to go fight the Midianites, after he wins the battle, after the victory, he loses that real great chance he had. Why? Looking at the whole thing in a perspective, in his personal perspective. That's what happens when he kills the kings of Midian. He asks his son, and he says to them, if you wouldn't have touched my brothers, I would save you. That's what happens to him at the end when he makes that ephod. Instead of burying the booty and saying, it's all for God, he goes and makes sort of a monument to show how great he is. And his son Avimelech, who takes over the leadership out of interests. And here, this great leader, Gideon, who reaches such a high peak in the leadership over Israel, we lose out on him, we miss out on his great chance of being the king of Israel. And we still have to await for the king to come later on in the book of Samuel, but not here in the book of Judges. Shalom.